to it, because for those who are listening, if you don't know who Erin Diggs is, let me tell you, Erin not only saved my life, but she also had me eat my placenta. That is the start. That is how we are starting off with this podcast. Saved my life by eating my placenta. Erin, how did you get involved with wanting to be part of, helping so many moms out there in this world? You do belly binding, placenta encapsulation, you're a doula. What inspired you to want to go into this field of work?
Yeah, I actually, I came to this work after I had my own experience with my daughter. She's 6 now. And
she's real cute.
Thank you. Yeah, she's a keeper. I basically came into this after I had a very rough situation with her. I had preeclampsia. She was born via emergency C-section at 34 weeks.
Can you explain what preeclampsia is to people? Because a lot of people don't know what that is. And I've actually never talked to anyone who had preeclampsia.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So preeclampsia is pregnancy-related hypertension. So, there's basically 2 presentations of it. One is, early onset, and it slowly progresses. Essentially what happens is your blood pressure slowly rises. You get a lot of swelling, edema, and your kidneys start having a hard time evacuating all of the excess fluid in your body and processing all of your waste. And then there's essentially the presentation that I had, which is late onset. And that's actually the more dangerous form, because what happens is that it kind of comes out of nowhere. So I was completely fine. I had a home birth planned, and I had, had a checkup with my midwife literally 2 weeks before, and there was literally nothing wrong with me. And then the next time I had my checkup, she was like, "You don't look like yourself." And she took my blood pressure, and it was through the roof. And she immediately took me to the hospital. And essentially what happens in that case is the symptoms tend to be more severe, and there's you're essentially in emergency mode because you haven't been trying to manage gradual symptoms throughout the weeks. It's just it's there, and you're doing what you have to do. And is there anything
that you can do? Is there food that people eat that causes maybe an inflammation, or what do they think it is?
So that's kind of the problem with preeclampsia, is that there's no, it occurs in 10% of all pregnancies around the world. First of all,
which is quite a lot if you think about it.
It's a lot. And that rate is obviously higher in developing countries. Mm-hmm. But, essentially there's no specific reason for it. The only thing that it can really be tied to is stress levels and inflammation. So it can really be caused for any number of reasons. If you have, a genetic predisposition for it. And by that, I mean, if your mother or your grandmother had preeclampsia, you are more inclined to have it. So now that I've had it, my daughter's more inclined to have it in the case that she decides to become pregnant later on. And so, but there's a lot of theories out there, but there's no real distinct reason. Obviously, there's some best practices that you can do. That's to limit the stress that you experience during pregnancy. It's to, make sure
which is almost impossible to not be stressed during pregnancy. So
I know it's so hard, and so, I mean, so much of pregnancy and birth it's a mind game. You know what I mean? So it's really trying to exercise tools that you have to just soothe your system. It's important, so it's easier said than done, but limiting your stress, making sure that you're eating a well-balanced diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, lower on sodium, making sure that, you're getting your protein in, things like this. It's kind of the general,
it's the general way of being I'm pregnant and I shouldn't be going to McDonald's right now and having, a double cheeseburger and all this stuff. But
don't do it every day.
Don't do it every day.
But
at the same time, when you're craving something and all bets are off.
Yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. And so it's kind of like, you do your best, right? But
Right.
no one can say, oh, you got preeclampsia because you went and got in and out like once a week. No one can say that. You know what I mean? There's no solid evidence for that. It's just obviously if you can try to do certain things, the likelihood of you developing preeclampsia is less, but you could also do all the right things and
it just naturally happened because it's genetics.
Yeah.
And so when you went into the hospital, were you like, holy shit, like the baby's coming right now? Or were you like, what is going to happen? What's the next step? I'm going home in a little bit. Like, oh, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, I'm very much when I'm in crisis mode, I'm like, okay, what's the next step? Right. I'm just like, let's keep it chill and find out what the next step is. So in my head, I was like, okay, she's taking me to the hospital. They're going to check my blood pressure. And if I'm okay, they're going to discharge me. My midwife, on the other hand, knew that this was not going to be the case.
Oh, she knew. And how far along were you at this point?
I was 33 weeks and
still really
3 or
early.
4 days. Oh yeah. Very early. And so basically what happened was I had spoken to my partner and I was like, yeah, it's fine. We're just going to go to the hospital. No big deal. He was working. We were living in Brooklyn at the time and he was working upstate filming.
Oh my gosh.
So he was like 6 hours away. And I hung up the phone and my midwife called him back and was like, yeah, Erin's downplaying the whole situation. You need to come now because you're going to be a dad.
Oh my gosh. What an amazing midwife, though, to know to make that call and make that decision and be like, look, like, because I get it. When you're in the middle of, when you're going through labor, whatever it may be, you really do downplay everything because you're like, I don't want to panic. I don't want it to be like the end all
I'm
be
trying
all.
to stay calm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I knew he was working. So I was like, no, it's fine. It's fine. So basically, I get to the hospital and it wasn't until they were like, oh yeah, you're not going home. They triaged me and they were like, you're not going anywhere. And it like sunk in and I sat there crying. So I was like, oh no, I'm not going home. This is it. So they were like, yeah, you're going to stay here until the baby's born. And I was like I said, I had a home birth planned and all of that went completely out the window.
Oh, natural. Say goodbye to it. Yeah.
Just all of it. Yeah, all of it. They had to immediately hook me up to IV medication they were surprised that I didn't walk in having seizures already.
Really?
My blood pressure was so high. Yeah. And in the next couple of days, it just kind of got exponentially worse because I was trying to do what I could to hold on because the fetus's lungs don't fully develop until they're 34 weeks. So I was obviously ahead of that. And so they were giving me steroids to essentially accelerate the process. But I, as a mother, wanted to hold on as long as I could.
Of course.
To make sure that she was okay. And so, they tried to induce me, but, it was way too early in the pregnancy. There was no way that was going to work.
No.
So they tried for 2 or 3 days to dilate and soften my cervix, and it just wasn't working. And so then basically it got to a point, and my midwife, again, this woman went above and beyond, and I've mentioned her multiple times, and I was like, she was just amazing. She's retired now, but she would come in and check on me, even though I was technically no longer her client. I've been transferred to the hospital. She came and checked on me, and frankly, she was the only one that I trusted because the hospital kept coming in trying to essentially bully me into doing what they wanted me to do. At one point, I literally had 3 or 4 department heads in my room at the same time. And I was just like,
sorry,
no,
buddy, that's not happening.
You're barking up the wrong tree. I'm not going to roll over that easy. I'm sorry. It's just not happening. I'm going to do it's your job to give me the information, and it's my job to make the best decision for myself.
And I think that's a really important thing for people to hear because, you know, that's what I was taught as well of, you know, you can have all the information, but it's your baby, it's your body, it's your decision. And yes, there may come a time where literally like you're passed out and you cannot make a decision, and maybe someone has to make a decision for you, whether that's your partner, your doula, or the doctor. But when you go in there, you know, I've heard so many horror stories before I gave birth of people saying, you know, I didn't want to have an induction and I was induced, and they told me that then the baby's heart rate was dropping and I needed an immediate C-section. And I thought I was going to have this natural birth. And just know, and I think what the lesson was that I learned and what I've tried to teach so many people is have as much information as you possibly can going into a hospital, know what the worst case scenarios may be, and then kind of just release and be like, let go and let the universe take over at some point, because you can voice your concerns, you can have your birth plan, and then like push comes to shove, there may be, you know, a dire life or death situation where you have to go, okay, you know what? I have to succumb to this and be like, here you go, you know, and which is what you did, but you were aware of everything. You talked about it. You were not going to be bullied because
and I knew what to look out for.
Yeah. And that was the other thing. I remember being in the hospital afterwards, and there was a girl who was walking the hallways with me, and she was with her husband, and she was crying because she was so upset that she wanted to have a hypnobirth and wanted to have a natural birth, and that she got told that she had to get induced and C-section. And afterwards she was like, I'm just so angry at myself that I let that happen. And I said to her, I go, you have to own your birth story. No matter what it is, you have to own it and be like, it's here. My baby's here. I was strong. I was powerful. And you can't live in regret because it's already happened and you have to push forward. But I remember being like, wow, I know that feeling. And it's that feeling. I didn't want a epidural and I ended up getting epidural. It's that feeling of like, I'm a failure. Like I failed myself. And like, I never want any woman to ever feel that way during before, during, or after their birth. Like you have to own it, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and like if we're talking about your epidural, like you acknowledge, like, you're like, I got to a place where it's just like, you know what? I've done my work.
I had to.
I've done this as much as I could. And now I'm going to go ahead and get some relief. And that's okay. That's okay.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And it's like, there's a certain amount of that where it's just like, you know, you got to, there's this very fine line that you have to toe where it's like you have your plan, but you also need to just kind of go with the flow. It's a little bit of both. You know what I mean? So,
absolutely. Because if I didn't have that epidural, I wouldn't, when I was, well, we'll get into it, but when I was, you know, hemorrhaging, there was no time for any sort of numbness, if you will. Like full vagina was in pain, like feeling every part of orifice and crevice possible. And that was on an epidural. So, you know, I cannot imagine what it would have been like without. And I'm happy that I don't have to imagine. So you had this birth, you ended up giving birth to beautiful Elliot, who is just incredible and like so smart.
Thank you.
How long afterwards did you go, wow, this is what I want to do?
It was really interesting because I had been toying with the idea of like being a doula while I was going to my childbirth education classes.
Wow.
I find like I was a total birth nerd about the whole thing. I was like doing extra research on top of really just enjoying all the information I was getting in class. And like but at that point, I was working as a senior project manager for an international polling firm. So I was like,
bowling?
Polling, international polling.
I thought you said bowling. And I was like, Erin, I did not know this about you. Oh my God, that is so incredible. Funny. Polling. Okay. Polling. Sure. That makes sense. Yes. It's still very strange.
It was a research firm. Yeah.
Right. Still odd job. Very different than being a doula. Very different.
Well, and that was the thing was I had this like, so the funny thing is that I'd gone to school for and like gotten into basically like nonprofit management, things like that.
Right.
And what's really funny is that after I had Elliot, I basically took a year off. I was a stay-at-home mom for a year. And during that time, we moved from New York to Los Angeles. And
wow, I can't imagine such a big move at a young age like that.
Was,
like for you,
there was
like
a lot
as a mom,
happening.
It's crazy.
Yeah, there was a lot happening. I was like, I wasn't doing the work that I was doing before. I'm a mom, and I'm like, you know, still going through like the birth trauma that I was dealing with, and also like the repercussions of like her being in the NICU for a month, and like, so we were like still dealing with that. We had made this move, and so there's like a lot of things. It was clearly like change. there was a lot of like stuff just happening in the universe, and so I just like, I had continued playing with this idea of becoming a doula. And I had always like, I had this false narrative about myself. Like, no, that's just not who you are. That's not who you are. And I decided out of nowhere, I was like, you know what, I'm going to sign up for a workshop and do this. And I signed up for my, my birth and my postpartum workshops. And it was like the funniest thing, because the second I decided to do that, everything just clicked. And back when this is a really like random but funny coincidence. Back when I was 19, I was talking, one of my friends, his older sister, was having a similar kind of like crisis that I was having, like at the age of 29 with a 1-year-old. But like, she had been going to school for something totally different at Columbia University. And like the whole time she's like, I want to be a midwife though. Like I want to do something totally different than what I'm doing now. And she was talking to me about becoming a doula. And she was like, you would be a great doula. This was when I was 19. Wow. And I was like, no, that's not my path. It's not for me. And so then all of a sudden, 10 years later, I'm like,
this
okay,
happened.
universe, I see you. I see you. Joke's on me. I get it. Yeah. And so it was one of those things where I took I just like, I did my workshops and I went right into the work, and it just, everything came together, and it just was clearly very meant to be.
Right. No, I think that's what's so special, right? Like that you had that little hint of, you know, like, here, I'm just going to plant the seed in your head, and in 10 years, it's actually going to come to fruition.
So weird. Yeah, it was
it's
so
just
weird.
Wild how that kind of stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
No, but I think that you are, you know, from an outsider's point of view, I could not imagine you doing anything else, because you are so good at it. And also, you know, while you were not my doula and I didn't have a doula, you, in all intents and purposes, for me, were my postpartum doula, even though that's not really like what the job was. It kind of ended up being that way, because when I had first heard about you, it was through Alicia Tamburi, who I also interview. Yeah. And she was the teacher of hypnobirthing for me, which really has continued to change my life for the better, because I'm a firm believer in meditation, and I was so against affirmations. And I talk about this for so long but there's something about these affirmations that I still listen to. And it's the only thing that will calm Lady down. It's hearing the like rainbow relaxation, birthing, you know, affirmation audio. And I'm like, this is so weird. Like, she's too old for this, but we're going to still go with it. Like, I guess, and you can just see her whole energy just go from, you know, anxious to calm to happy. Yeah. And it was something that, you know, but when I had talked to Alicia, we were talking about postpartum and what, you know, kind of things you should do, like the foods you should eat and the things. And she was very, very, very keen on me reaching out to you to talk about something called belly binding and placenta encapsulation. Yes. Well, placenta encapsulation is pretty like easy. It is what it is. Like, it's exactly what it says. It's encapsulating your placenta. Yes. Now, my mom was all about this. She was like, this is so cool, Alessandra. Like, you know, this is so interesting. We had done all this research. When you encapsulate and you eat your placenta, which sounds really gross because you never would know like what you're taking. It's just in pill form, you know, it's just powdered pill. I read more things about it helping with postpartum depression, helping, period, like, and helping with postpartum anxiety, helping with nutrition, helping with latching with your baby, for breastfeeding. There were so many positives. And I actually just found out that they are now doing research on it, on the benefits, so they can share this information with people. Because it sounds so woo woo and so gross, but it's actually not at all. And it gives this energy to the point where my husband actually took, 2 of the pills. I didn't let him have a lot, but I let him have 2.
I love
yes.
That.
And then I'm pretty sure I was a little out of it, but I'm pretty sure my best friend Jenna took one too. So shout out to Jenna if she did do that, because I did give her one. But I didn't have a lot to give, so I wanted to make sure I ingested all of it. But can you explain to those who are pregnant or who are just like, what are you, a cannibal? Like, what's going on? What is eating your placenta? Like, what is kind of the importance behind it? Like, from you, like, that you may know more research about and stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, the placenta is an organ, it's a temporary organ that's obviously grown along with the baby throughout pregnancy. And so your body naturally evacuates it. It is. It kind of is. It's like the coolest alien ever. Yeah. And so it gets evacuated after birth. It literally is called the afterbirth. And, it's I would say that the organ that it's kind of most similar to that we have is the liver. And when you think about the benefits of eating liver, for those of you that, consume meat, the liver is a powerhouse piece of meat to eat, right? It has B vitamins, it has iron, it has all sorts of minerals that you need, and high in protein,
right?
And like healthy fats, things like that. And like, so it's one of those things where, like, so many people will tell you, like, eat liver. It's so good for you when you have a lot of, like, what's the word? I guess, like, when you're depleted. It's a great food to have when you're depleted. So in that same way, placenta is great to have postpartum because you are in a depleted state. You've just had somebody drawing from your body for 9 to 10 months. You're now needing to use whatever store that you have to make milk if you are choosing to breastfeed, right? And in addition to that, you've lost all of this excess fluid and blood. Granted, you were making excess fluid and blood, but it's like you're still losing a lot. Your hormones are plummeting. Like, there's a lot that's happening. You're in essentially a depleted state. And so when you are consuming your placenta, and again, you can do this, the easiest way is capsules, right? Have somebody dehydrate it for you, encapsulate it. Other people, and I provide this for my clients as well, as we can do smoothie cubes as well, tinctures. But, anyways, when you take the capsules and consume your placenta, it helps soften that blow. Because it can be rough. It's rough. Like I said, you're going through, you're exhausted. Your body's been all of your stores have been drawn from.
Exhausted.
You're still having to work. Like, you're doing all of this, like waking up every couple of hours, changing a baby's diaper, soothing the baby. Like, again, if you're lactating, your body's making that milk. That is work. And so it's like all of these things. Obviously, that's part of why the biggest suggestion is to continue taking your prenatal vitamins, or now, because the market's gotten fancier, you have postnatal vitamins. But, you keep taking a multivitamin, and then taking the placenta on top of that helps just like soften all of that, because it gives you the B vitamins that you're needing and lacking in order to like have energy. It's giving you that iron that you need after you've lost a bunch of blood. It's giving you those minerals that you're needing because your sleep cycle's all messed up,
Totally. And I think the weirdest thing that I found, and I don't know if this was specifically the hospital that I went to or what it was, but when I had talked to my doctor beforehand about, that I was eating my placenta, basically, I didn't say it like that, but I was like,
you have to softball it in.
you got to softball it in. And my doctor was like pretty cool about it. And we was like, oh yeah, I got all the gals do it. Like it's not a big deal, you know? And it was interesting because I had other reactions from other doctors. You know, I came in with my cooler, my little igloo, and it was cherry red, and it had on like, you know, a little emo sticker on it. So I knew it was mine. And like my mom was like, I can't even believe that I have to go and deliver this placenta. Like, I feel like this is out of a movie. Like she couldn't wrap her brain around the fact that like her daughter's placenta was going to be in a fucking igloo, basically, like as if we're going camping. But she was like all for it. She just was like, this is such a trip for me. This is so different than like anything I ever thought of, you know? But I remember that the doctors were like, well, like, cause, you know, for those who don't know, and you obviously knew, my doctor passed away right before I gave birth. So everything was like kind of new and off kilter and just kind of a mess. But I didn't have, so I had my plan, right? But once again, I had to let the plan out the window and everything went great. It's fine. But I remember going in there with the placenta, and there were different, you know, people that were coming in and out, and they were like, oh, I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. Well, you know that if there's, you know, poop in the placenta, you know, they can't have that. You can't eat that. If you have this, you have that. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But like, I'm not even delivering yet. So like, let's worry about this when it happens. And like, I wonder, like, is it because it's a very Western environment where we're not in, you know, a home birth or a birthing center, or because I didn't have a doula or a midwife with me? Do you find hearing that like with your other clients that sometimes it's like kind of looked down upon when you go into a hospital environment? Yes. Okay. So I wasn't the only one.
Oh my goodness. Like, I don't think I've heard maybe one or two medical staff, and this is including nurses and OBs, that have like not completely shat on the practice. Like,
really,
they are not big fans.
It's so weird for me.
They're not big
it's so
fans.
weird for me because I'm like, just like, let it be. Like, if it's something that's also making me comfortable, and like, look, you know, I've shared this story before, so I won't get into the grave detail of it. But you know, as you know, because you were there, you know, after I gave birth and I was stitched up, I started hemorrhaging, and I was having a lot of blood loss to the point where they thought I was going to have a transfusion, and so they had to examine. You know, I don't even remember, in quote unquote, birthing my placenta. I don't even remember that. And it's not because,
I mean, it sounds like there's a lot going on. So
exactly. It's not because I was like super drugged. It was because like it literally, she shot out and the placenta shot out all at once. Like it was like, like I mean, if I was a professional athlete doing baseball, like holy shit, I could just like throw that thing out of my vagina really fast. But it literally, they had to have all the, when I was stitched up and I started hemorrhaging, I just remember a rush of doctors coming in, and they came in with the ultrasound because they couldn't understand why I was continually bleeding. So for them, they had a specialist that actually came in to examine my placenta, and they went through the whole placenta to see if there were any holes in it, if there were any tears, that possibly there was maybe a piece of the placenta that was still inside of me. That's why I was hemorrhaging. And it was all good to go, and they put it in the igloo and sent my mom on her way with it. But it was really interesting that you just can't even imagine, like they have a specialist that knows how to examine a placenta. You know, it's just wild. But I will tell you, I know in my heart of hearts, you know, without medical research, I know that eating my placenta saved my life, because I was so depleted of hormones, of energy. There was a point where you came over and I could only hold the baby for 5 minutes without getting like really dizzy. And
you were white as a ghost. You were so pale. You were so pale because you just had such low blood volume. Yeah.
Such low blood volume. And like that's, so the part two about this, you know, interview is the other thing that you provided for me is you do belly binding. And when we were doing the belly binding, I'm so grateful you were there. maybe actually, you know what I will have you do? I'll explain what belly binding is to people because I explain it and I feel like I explained it totally wrong. So I'm going to have you explain what belly binding is.
Okay.
I still, by the way, have the fabric. I'm like, oh, it's still here. Like it's a keepsake. I'm never getting rid of it. Like never going to get rid of it.
It's great.
So
I mean, I love it. Yeah.
explain what it is because I heard about it because Beyonce apparently belly binded. And I was like, well, whatever Beyonce does, like I need to do. I cannot.
Whatever Beyonce does, we all need
that.
to do. So.
Exactly. But I was like, oh, she belly binds? Cool. I'll do that. Like, that sounds cool. So that's how this happened. So what is belly binding?
Yeah. So belly binding is actually a practice that has roots all over the world. Actually, wow. Yeah, women have been wrapping their abdomen postpartum forever. And so this essentially what, as a general practice, what it involves is taking a piece of fabric and wrapping the abdomen and giving it a certain amount of compression. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now there's different techniques depending on where in the world you are. The type of belly binding that I do, the technique that I do is from Malaysia. It's called Bekong belly binding. And essentially it takes a really long, I'm talking like 20 yards worth of fabric, a really long, thin piece of fabric. And you take that fabric and little by little, you're literally just like wrapping around the abdomen. And then you do like a little twist and then you just keep going. And so you're kind of spiraling your way up. Traditionally, they would start
like a beautiful worm is how I felt.
It's like like a cocoon, right? So traditionally it started like mid thigh, like it started really low.
Wow.
And then it would go all the way up until like right under your breasts. Obviously in the modern day, we need a little bit more movement. That type of wrapping or that extensive wrapping is based on the like idea, the like East Asian idea of like postpartum confinement where you're not moving at all or leaving your bed for like a month. So like wrapping somebody that extensively made sense. But these days when you're kind of like needing to go to pediatrician appointments, people don't necessarily follow like a traditional confinement like practice, right? You want to have it more, you want to be more mobile. So these days we're wrapping essentially from your hips and then as high up as it makes sense to go. Depending, I actually just wrapped up, pun intended, with another belly binding client who, her, like for instance, her ribs, sometimes when you're carrying high during your pregnancy, your ribs flare out. And so wrapping somebody very high helps bring the ribs back in. I didn't need to do that for her. She mostly needed support around her hips. So we kept the wrapping low. So it's like this way we can kind of like, that's kind of the beauty of doing postpartum abdominal binding is that you can cater it to the person's body. It's so much better than, you know, the belly bandits or like corsets. Like, you know, at the hospital, they'll give you that. I personally was given one after my C-section and I never wore that thing because it felt terrible. It was awful. It made me feel like it gave me, and made me feel like my guts were just going to spill out. Like I had like so much pressure on my pelvic floor from that thing because all it does is it like constricts you uniformly, like up and down. And that's not what we want to do. The whole point of abdominal binding and specifically with like Bekong belly binding is you're wrapping from the bottom up. So you're lifting everything. And so, so the benefits of doing that sort of wrapping is everything from helping to support all of the soft tissue that's been stretched out during pregnancy to like helping all of the organs move back to their pre-pregnancy position because they got all shuffled around during pregnancy.
Well, and
like
you know,
your stomach's
it's crazy.
Up in your chest, like everything's
your
moved
organs
around.
are literally in the weirdest like places in your body. And I am trying to get into TikTok to try to, during the pandemic, like I was like real slutty on TikTok doing these slutty dances. Then I was like, let's get rid of those. Like I'm going to be a mom, and now I'm like using it for, the podcast. And I find myself, the same way that I used Reddit during my pregnancy to find a community. I've really found it very interesting because I found a really cool algorithmic, if that's even a word, way to find other moms who are around the same postpartum timing that I am, who are very, open to everything, right? So I follow some moms that, practice belly binding like I did or ate the placenta. I follow moms who are a little bit further along than I am, so I can see like what they do with their babies to interact. Like, how are they doing, cool, different, unique things, right?
Yeah.
And I always seem to find myself with these funny videos of these moms being like, my organs are literally like under my armpit and up my butt right now. Like it's all over the place. Like, how do I fix it? And it's so funny because like you don't realize that it takes like 6 months to a year for your organs to finally go back into their own normal position. And, I remember being like, I don't understand why my stomach isn't like going back to normal. I'm losing weight. Why isn't it doing this? What is this puff? Is it, and then it's like, oh, you might have diastasis recti. Whoa, what the fuck is that? You know what I mean? Like there are so many things that you don't know about. Pelvic floor therapy, something that I'm in. Never did I know what that was until you were so kind to share with me what pelvic floor therapy is and why I would probably need it. So there's certain things that I think are not being screened from your OB, which fine, maybe it's not their place, whatever. But I want to be that person that's providing and sharing and like overly sharing to my friends and family and to strangers who listen to the podcast who are now my friends, because I want everyone to feel like they have a community, that they have these like strange things that you maybe never heard of that could actually save your life. And like, that's what kind of belly binding was for me, because belly binding, there were different packages that people could do. You can do, like 5 sessions, you can do 30 sessions, you could do 60 sessions. And I chose to do the ones that were every other day of the rewrapping. And we had to take a pause because, I was so lucky and so grateful that you were there with me during these wrapping sessions, because you did this, massage on my body and womb work, WOMB, because I can't pronunciate womb work, and these womb massages, because, your body has gone through essentially like this accident and it needs to be healed. It doesn't go back to ground zero. And, it's very normal. Here's where it gets a little TMI, everyone. So, if you don't want TMI, like check out now. But, I was bleeding, and every mom does bleed. And when you leave the hospital, they give you diapers, and for yourself and for your baby. And you're like, cool, this is my life now. Like, what is like sexual tension in your household? It doesn't exist anymore because your husband sees you and your child as the exact same. And I just was bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And I was so lucky because, I had you where, my mom was like, I think this is normal to be bleeding, but this seems like a lot. And you were like the best second opinion, of like, I work with women postpartum every day. Like, this is not normal. Like, it's now gotten to the point where you are very ill. And it was 10 days postpartum, and I was bleeding out, clots that were the size of a liver. And you said to me, give me the baby. I'm going to hold her for a second. You and your mom and Sturgis, pack up. You guys need to go to the hospital right now,
Well,
and
we like
so
put you into
grateful.
bed and we put you into bed. We got you immediately in bed.
I was like, what is going on? Like, how is this happening? I was like, I want to cry, but I can't even cry because I don't even have energy. I was like, so, weak. And I just like, was like, no, it's normal. It's normal. And I realized like now, months later of being able to kind of look back at it, there's two parts to this. The first part is it's really depressing to me to think about all the time which I do, because I don't really remember the first 3 weeks of my daughter's life, because I was in such fight or flight mode of, I have to wake up, I have to feed her, I have to burp her, I have to change her, I have to give her love, and then I sleep with her. Like every
Yes.
schedule she was on, I was on the same schedule. So there was no like, everything's great, like everything's perfect. And I just remember looking at other moms, ones that I knew, strangers, looking at their pictures, being like, I don't understand. How are they having a life right now? Like, I'm dying. How are they having a life? And then, I just remember you saying we need to take a break. We're going to take a break from the belly binding and we're going to get back to it. And, 3 weeks postpartum is when I had to have my DNC. And what does DNC stand for again? I always forget. I'm like, I should Google this and I should know.
Dissect and cauterize, or
thank you. Thank you. I knew I would get there. So dissect and cauterize. And that's what I had to do. I had to have this DNC and have everything basically like burned out of my body, because I had no idea why I was still continually bleeding these liver, and it was frustrating because doctors were like, I believe you, but I think it's normal. I think you're overworking yourself. And I'm like, fuck you. Like, I'm not.
Sorry. It's dilation and curettage. It's
dilation
dilate your
curettage.
Yeah. So
yes,
but
and it
obviously
was
we know what it
scraping
means.
the uterus. It was scraping the uterus, and it was frustrating because these doctors, were very kind, but they were like, I think you're overworking. I think you're stressing. Are you exercising? And I'm like, I am not even doing anything but literally rolling out of bed and like giving her a boob and calling it a day. And I'm bleeding out. And it still like haunts me to this day, months later, because I just remember looking down every time I would go to the bathroom, and it would be like as if I had, my worst fear come true of like having a miscarriage. Like that's what it was like every time.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, my heart goes out to everyone who has suffered miscarriages, who's, had these DNCs, who have had, the hemorrhaging, who've had the blood loss, who have had all that. I mean, my heart goes out to everyone for dealing with this kind of stuff, because you don't realize how traumatic it is until you live it. And then when it stops bleeding and you're like, everything's good, it's every day the anticipation of like, well, when is it going to happen again? Like, when am I going to bleed? What is that first reaction going to be like? But I just want to thank you, because the belly binding helped me before I had, the DNC operation, because it was like, oh, I'm finally healing. And afterwards, because it was like an emotional support of being able to truly heal me from the inside out. So I thank you so much, Erin. Like, you literally helped me more than I could possibly even express in words. And just having the physical support of this belly binding, fabric, it literally felt like I was stable and my guts weren't falling out of me. And it looked really cute too. So I had to film it.
It doesn't hurt, but right?
It does not hurt at all. It feels like amazing. It's like, oh my gosh, it's great. But now, have you ever experienced that with other moms postpartum, where there have been traumatic events that have happened afterwards, and you've acted as a therapist and as a emotional support and belly binder and doula and postpartum doula? Like, do you just experience this all the time?
I mean, that's the job. Obviously, I, as a postpartum doula, that specifically would be me walking into the house and doing like a full shift, 6 to 10 hours with a family. But even when I'm coming in just for to drop the placenta capsules off, or even when I'm coming in to do the belly binding sessions, or even when I'm coming in to do pelvic steaming sessions, like all of these things, it gives me a little bit of time with people in their most vulnerable state, You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you are freshly postpartum, you are raw. There's really
in every way,
in every way.
Every form. Yes.
Yeah. And, I must say that my personal experience, my birth story gives me the ability to really just like hold space for people when they've gone through whatever it is that they've gone through. So, it's definitely part of the job. A doula is meant to be, in part an emotional support person. Essentially, if you ask anybody what the definition of a doula is, it's somebody who provides non-medical, physical, emotional, and informational support. So, emotional support's a big part of the journey. And yeah, like I've had so many people, I'll walk into a house and like the parents just cry just they're like, we're so happy you're here. They're just like so relieved that somebody is here to just like, at the very least, walk the journey with them, because
just hold space.
Because the way that we give birth in this country specifically, it's lonely. It's a very lonely process. And like, unless you know, and you're just one of those people that has just somehow managed to carve out this amazing village for yourself, which most people like don't and have not done that by the time they become parents. Like, it's hard. It's hard. You feel really alone. So
no, I completely understand. You feel totally alone. Now, this is something that for me is not what's happening, but I wonder, because I've talked to a lot of moms who, have very traumatic birth stories. And then they're like, I want to have a second baby, but I'm so scared to have a second baby because of something that I went through. Now, we've talked about this where you had a traumatic birth story, talking about maybe having another, child in the future, maybe not. But what would you say to moms who maybe have been through such trauma? Like, how can they prepare to know that A, it's going to be a different birth story, and B, like, not to be scared to, because I feel like I was so naive, like thinking I knew what a birth was. And then like, that's going all out the window, being like, oh wait, ouch. What would you say to a mom to kind of go, it's okay, you can do it again, and it's not going to be the same?
I mean, part of it is that if somebody has gone through trauma, specifically birth trauma, like, and they're scared of childbirth after that, like, that makes sense. I get it. I feel it. I feel that, like, absolutely. What I will say is that, trauma is essentially an experience that has been stored away in our nervous system. And so the first step to really kind of like moving past that fear from the birth trauma that you've experienced is you need to find a way to help release and regulate your nervous system. And, there's all sorts of ways that you could do that. Some people respond really well to like talk therapy. So just sharing their birth story kind of like on repeat and just exercising that does the trick. Right. Other people like myself, I don't respond very well to like talk therapy. For me, somatic work is what works best for me. So things like, breath work or, meditation or pelvic steaming, those things help release my nervous system and help me exercise things that way. Really finding the way to just kind of like soothe your body. And, obviously we're talking about something slightly different right now, but like going back to belly binding, that's one of the benefits that it has postpartum, is that it gives your body a level of compression that helps soothe your vagus nerve, which is a major nerve channel in your body, and helps like soothe that raw feeling of your nervous system just being completely out of whack. That it's a hug. It's a hug.
It literally is.
Yeah.
Like when I had the belly binding, that is what I felt every single time.
Yeah.
Like I felt like a hug. I felt the support.
Yeah.
And what was interesting, which we didn't, I forgot to talk about, was towards the end of the belly binding, I think it must have been, I don't know, maybe I was like 45 days postpartum or something, because it was after we had to restart over again after the DNC. But I remember the last like 2 sessions, I would say to you, I'd be like, it's a little tight. Like when I sleep, like I find myself like taking it off in the middle of the night. And you're like, yeah, because your body doesn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
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 I didn't need it anymore. It was like my body being like, you're healed.
Exactly. You needed it, gave you the hug when you needed it. And then when you didn't, we loosened it up a little bit and we went a little gentler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just the last 2 times, but it made sense because it had been so many days afterwards. And I was like, oh, my body's like getting back into it, and it was interesting because it's like, wow, your body, like literally the thing that I learned the most about my pregnancy and my postpartum journey is truly listen to your body, because it will express all the emotions that it needs. Like it's literally screaming to you, being like, yeah, I'm ready, or I'm not ready, or, oh my gosh, like you're going to die. Like there were so many things that came out all the time along with a baby's head, Yep. But there were a lot of things that came out emotionally and physically for me that I am so blessed that it happened. And I'm so lucky that I was able to have this journey, for all intents and purposes, calling it that I went on, and so lucky that I got to meet incredible people like you, because I will say the people that I met during this pregnancy and postpartum journey have now just like changed my life, like for the better. And I never would have met them if I didn't, ever have a little lady. Erin, I have to ask you, what is my little lady? What is your emotional support?
Oh, like just what's the thing that kind of helps recenter me?
Whatever you want it to be. Yeah. Whatever it means to you.
Let's see. That's a hard one, because I'm thinking of like so many different things, but yeah.
You can have a lot of different things.
Yeah. I mean, because like initially I'm thinking like, oh, well, literally like snuggles on the couch with my partner and my daughter. Like that's our little happy place. But I would say like emotional support. I would have to say
that could be your emotional support.
It definitely can be, like, absolutely. I would have to say that at the core of things though, my emotional support is being able to sit quietly with myself.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's great.
That would
that's
be
powerful.
Mine. That would be mine. I mean, this is like a whole other thing, but as you know, I had cancer back in 2020. Right. And one of the things that allowed me to really like navigate that situation was, it was kind of unfortunate. Because it was during COVID, I was not allowed any visitors, and I would be in the hospital for a week at a time with no visitors. But I will say that as hard as that was, having that time to just sit quietly with myself was what allowed me to process and navigate the whole thing. So I don't know if that really works for most people, but sitting quietly with myself is a huge emotional support for me.
I will tell you, I think that not only does it work for people who haven't tried it should try it, because it will work. And I think that's, I know for me, meditation, meditating is what saved my life. And I remember, right after I remember being so frustrated before I had the epidural, because I just wanted to meditate and I needed that 10 minutes. And the second I had the epidural, they were like, okay, the doctor, squeeze your legs together because she could come at any moment and I need to go get the doctor. And I remember going, okay, I have at least 5 minutes. And we turned the lights off, and my husband and my mom and I all like just closed our eyes and meditated together, knowing that that was like my final, piece before she was arriving.
Yeah.
And I will never forget that. And being in tune with yourself and it's almost like, right, a recharge of going, okay, you can do this. Like whatever you have to go through. And for you, like chemo, it's like, okay, you know what? I'm alone with this, but I have the power inside me to get this done and to kick ass and to go do it. And you did. And like, round of applause.
Thank you. Yeah.
Like you did. That's so amazing. Oh my gosh. Well, Erin, how can everyone find you? I'm going to have in the show notes, your website and everything, but how can they find you if they, would like your help?
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. You could literally just, I recently upped my game and started a little Yelp page. So you can actually find me on Yelp.
Woohoo!
My practice is called Alayla Birth. It's actually, Alayla is my daughter's middle name because she's obviously what inspired me to come to this work. So it's A-L-A-Y-L-A.
That's so pretty. What does that name mean?
It is the Greek female personification of a war cry. It's very hyper specific. Yeah. And so essentially the reason why we gave her that name was when she was in the NICU, she was the tiniest one. She was only 3 pounds and 10 ounces when she was born. She was tiny.
Oh my God. A little
tiny,
oh.
tiny. And so, but she was the loudest, she was the loudest one in the NICU. And there was a certain irony to that because obviously the whole reason why I held on for like 3 days in the hospital as my organs were shutting down was I was like, I need her lungs to be okay because their lungs don't fully develop until 34 weeks. So I'm like, I need her lungs to be okay. So there was this wonderful, like, just kind of irony to the whole thing of her being the smallest person in the NICU, but the loudest one.
Those lungs.
Yeah. So her dad came up with that name and I was like, that's perfect. Done.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Oh, it's so beautiful. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.